Inspired by the life of the savvy and ambitious Colombian businesswoman Griselda Blanco comes a new Netflix original limited series. Griselda tells the story of a devoted mother who, with her lethal blend of charm and relentless savagery, creates one of the most powerful cartels in history. Witness Sofia Vergara's captivating transformation into the godmother of the underworld. Griselda, streaming January 25th, only on Netflix.
Join me, 48 Hours correspondent Erin Moriarty, on my podcast, My Life of Crime, as I take on true crime investigations like no other. This season, I'm looking into the labyrinth of crime and secrets within families. I'm cutting straight to the evidence and talking to the people directly involved, including investigators and the families of victims. Listen to My Life of Crime with Erin Moriarty wherever you get your podcasts.
A note to listeners, the following podcast contains content that may not be suitable for all audiences.
Well, I went to school for forensic psychology, and then I started my collective study on serial killers. This was back in 2014, but that's when I had, shortly afterwards, a tragic life occurrence where my best friend was actually murdered by my cousin. That really, was the driving force behind the work. Especially like on San Quentin's death row, they'll be on the yard talking about how many more victims they have that law enforcement has never got them on, never charged them for, and there's all these families out there looking for their loved ones. And I saw this as like something I had to do as well, to bring these loved ones home.
It just breaks my heart, like she's still out there. It was awful. Yeah, I can't even imagine. We would love to have her back. I hope you get it done.
You are listening to Partners in True Crime. We are your hosts, Rob and Cindy Dorfman.
Today, we are very excited to introduce to you an amazing woman who we've been working with for the past year and who has been doing groundbreaking work in the study of serial killers for over a decade.
Laura Brand is a private investigator and a forensic psychology practitioner. Laura has interviewed over 50 serial killers nationwide while conducting a collective study which has now eclipsed some of the work that the FBI has done.
When Laura came to us over a year ago, we couldn't have been more impressed with her and her work. In our eyes, she is the real-life Clarice from Silence of the Lambs.
As you'll discover from listening to Laura, is that she comes to this from a personal angle, and the goal of her work is not just to study these monsters, but also to find the many lost victims that have never been recovered after the killers were convicted.
Laura will also be sharing the many recordings she has done over the years with serial killers to show how her methodology works and to get vital information from them. That information can lead to the recovery of the victims.
It's going to be an incredible journey, and now let's talk to the serial killer whisperer herself, Laura Brand. Okay, so we have Laura Brand on. Laura, wonderful to have you on here. We're very excited to kick off this new podcast with you and about your work. And Cindy and I are excited to kind of delve in even deeper. I mean, we've been working with you on a bunch of other things, but I think it's really important for the world to understand the type of work that you do on a daily basis. And so why don't we start off by, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Tell us about how you got into doing what you're doing with serial killers, what motivated you to do this, and why you're still doing it, and give us a brief example of some of the things that you've learned through this whole process.
Yeah. Well, I went to school for forensic psychology, and then I started my collective study on serial killers. This was back in 2014, but that's when I had, shortly afterwards, a tragic life occurrence where my best friend was actually murdered by my cousin. That really, was the driving force behind the work. It motivated me more, to find the missing victims, the ones that haven't been recovered, such as Cindy and Andrea, who are up in the San Gabriel Mountains. The one solace that I did have, when my best friend Nicole died, was at the funeral, knowing that I got to bury her. And, Cindy and Andrea's families and so many other families out there don't have that same solace to bury their loved one.
Let's go back to this for a second. So when you talk about this horrific event that you were a victim of, I mean, your cousin murdered your best friend. So did that send off alarm bells that maybe this is a genetic thing, or is this something that you were worried about for yourself? Is this something that, tell me a little bit about your cousin and what your thoughts were about when that happened, because I can't imagine how you must have felt, not only losing your best friend, but knowing that your family member, someone that you're genetically tied to, committed this crime.
Yeah, and give us some context too. It's like, who your cousin was, who your friend was, like at what point in your life that this happened.
Yeah, it was right after my 27th birthday. My cousin is just a year older than me. We grew up together. We were like inseparable, like twins. His friend Nicole, she was a sergeant in the Army, just the most vivacious and loving person you could ever imagine. I hate to say the cliche, but she really did light up a room. And when this happened, it was just like a state of just complete shock and denial. You really don't think this could ever happen to you. And especially, someone who is studying this subject matter. It was just such a huge blow. And it really makes you realize this could happen to anyone.
Do you mind going into a little bit of the circumstances of, what your cousin did to your friend and all that kind of stuff, and how it kind of developed into a murder?
Yeah. They had been living together, and her father had just moved in about a month prior. And on the night of January 30th into the 31st, a little after midnight, he went into the room where her father was sleeping and bludgeoned him to death. And then he went to the couch where she was sleeping and bludgeoned her to death.
So he killed both her and her father?
Yes.
And what was the motivation for this?
I have gone into the prison to interview him, and for years I've tried to get the why out of him, some type of, answer, and I still haven't been able to get that why, that motivation from him.
He's never told you why he did this?
No.
Was there any kind of warning signs beforehand from them that you can glean that motive that you think maybe could have had, or just kind of a random act of violence?
It was so crazy because they were over my house about a week prior, and they were talking about getting married. And Nicole was telling me, what kind of ring she wants, and she wanted to get wedding magazines and start looking through them. So it was a total shock when I had found out the news.
Did he ever show signs of violence or any kind of inclination that he could do something like this?
He had gotten into fights in high school, but I always thought it was just like teenage boy stuff, just fighting or fist fighting kind of stuff. But besides for that, no.
So after this tragedy, is this what sparked you to kind of go deeper into the mind of a killer and understand why? Because he never gave you an answer?
Yeah. It definitely is the driving force behind everything, to figure out the whys, the hows, and, how does this, how can an act of violence just spontaneously kind of happen? What are the warning signs, the precursors? What did I miss, with him?
So you were actually actively in criminal justice studying in college, studying criminal justice and criminology when this happened?
Yes, I was about a year into my study already.
And there was no fight or, there's always this inciting incident that sparks people to motivate them to do things. At least we think there is. And that's what's so disturbing about so many of these crimes, is because sometimes there isn't.
Right. If you look at serial killers, it's just a stranger killing, spontaneous, with no real motive, which is kind of what I saw with my cousin. I couldn't find this motive, and it was kind of spontaneous. And where is this stemming from? Where is this coming from? Why is this happening?
And so how long after this happened did you decide to create this study? And then tell me a little bit about the study so people can understand what you've been doing.
Yeah. Well, I started it a year prior to the homicide because I'd always, studied forensic psychology. The whole premise behind it was I was looking at why, how people with antisocial personality can manipulate, forensic, just anybody in the forensic evaluation, whether it's a counselor, therapist, psychologist. How can we kind of, counteract that so they aren't able to, use these manipulative tactics on the professionals in the field. So I thought maybe if I design a set of questions, and I designed 75 questions where there's no right or wrong answer, it's open-ended. So there's no way they can just answer it how they think that we're looking for them to answer.
And how did you get that idea to do that?
It just kind of came to me because I'm like, if they already know how they want, if they already know how to answer a question, like, do you have homicidal tendencies or traits, or do you want to hurt somebody? Kind of like these basic questions they're being asked. They know exactly what to say. And I was like, how do we take that away where they don't know what to say? And then I thought, open-ended questions.
So your technique was to kind of throw them off guard by asking them indiscriminate questions and hopes, and then use those as a baseline to figure out their personality disorder.
Exactly. So once we looked at their answers, we could look into the thought process behind their answers. And when we did that, when Dr. John White and I looked at the answers, we could see actually all the personality traits coming forward. And I'm talking about the deviant personality traits. We saw the antisocial come out in the answers. We saw the narcissism come out in the answers as you're going through each question on the survey.
Can you give us an example of some of the questions you've asked, just like a couple, and then what some of the correlation answers that you had that kind of gave you those unique qualities that they have?
Yeah, one of the first questions I said is, besides titles others have given you, who are you? Because I kind of wanted to strip them of titles they've been given, whether it's a murderer, criminal, something like that. Just who are you? Tell me who you are, and let them just go with it.
And then give us one example of one of the serial killers and like what they would tell you, what they told you, and if it was surprising to you and how they saw themselves.
It really ranged, but some of them said, I'm a loving person, I'm a caring person. And so that really showed us into like the delusional thought patterns that they have, the manipulative patterns they might be using. A couple said nothing, I'm invisible, I'm nothing.
Did you ever give the test to your cousin?
I did.
And what were the results of that?
John is still scaling it, but he did see some antisocial personality traits come through with some of the answers.
And then what was the result of his trial?
He just had his second trial, and it went from 60 years to I believe it's now 30 years.
Did he ever say why he killed his girlfriend's father and her? Nothing. There was no reason.
Nothing.
Was he on drugs?
He said he was, and there was like a toxicology report done, but I personally think he took the drugs after.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And they didn't fight and have like explosive arguments or any kind of hint to you that maybe this was a toxic relationship, or that maybe, since you were doing this study, I think it's so interesting that you were doing this study and then this happened. Because it's like, here you're doing this study and then you have this personal thing happen that's such a tragedy. Your cousin, who is like a brother to you, turns around.
I interviewed all the neighbors after, the homicide occurred. I just kind of like canvassed the neighborhood, and the people who live next door in his duplex said they did hear some pretty bad fight. Like it sounded like somebody was getting thrown up against the wall, and there was a lot of yelling and screaming, but I had never seen anything like that. And those were the only ones who had said they had heard the fights before.
Did Nicole ever tell you anything, that there was ever any arguments or any kind of stress in the relationship? Or
no, I mean, like I said, she was there with she wanted to get wedding magazines and telling me what ring she wanted. So there was nothing like let on that there was issues, because I would have stepped in, of course, if I had known anything.
And then since he was a family member and he was your cousin, is there any hereditary thing, anything passed down from in your family, any violence? And we find out sometimes that, there is some of that.
None that I'm aware of, but I also come from a huge Italian family with, hundreds of cousins. So I'm not sure if there's anybody else, not that I'm aware of. My grandmother's brother, he did have schizophrenia, but this was because he was a firefighter in New York, and he went into a building and saw two little children burned to a crisp, like holding each other. And that was what set him off for that. But that's the only thing of something genetic or, mental illness that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
So then once you started conducting the study and really diving into this, I would imagine after this tragedy, just to kind of get answers, what was your process?
It was very hard to even go back into it. I think it took at least 2 months before I even wanted to, return back into the prisons and doing the survey and the study. It was very, very hard. I really felt like I had failed her. I felt like I had failed him, and like I didn't want to go back. I felt like if I couldn't save them, how could I help other people? So it took a lot of, self-reflection to even want to go back and keep doing this work. And finally, after some time, a switch came on, and it was like, this is what I'm meant to do at this point. To have this happen to you in your life, this is a sign that you're on the right path and you need to help others now that you've lived through it in both ways, losing someone as a victim and as an offender.
So like very many victims' families that we've interviewed, we have lots of them. It took you went through the same process. you went through the trauma and you had to, it wasn't until you kind of overcame the trauma, and I'm saying that you probably still have the trauma, but it wasn't at that point until you realized maybe I can do something to prevent this for other people.
Yeah. I would say, I just had 2 girls actually last week write to me and say that one had a brother that was murdered last week and one had a sister that was murdered last week. And I get those kind of messages all the time. And they come to me for help because, when you lose somebody to homicide, it's a totally different type of loss. It's so unexpected, and you've lost them in a violent manner, and your brain cannot process what has just really happened. So the 5 stages of grief are like completely different from a normal death where it's an accident or natural causes. It takes so much longer to even like get to go through denial, and just get to you're like, okay, this has happened. And the anger stage is a lot more intense and longer. And I don't think a lot of people have anybody to go to or talk to, when they encounter a death, which is homicide. So that's always been like one of my goals now, is to help people who are going through it, who have gone through it, to understand it more, to educate people more on it, and to do some research to find out, the whys and the hows, and can we prevent this?
Well, I think what makes you credible for these victims' family is that you've been through it. You've walked the walk, and now you talk the talk, and you can understand where they're coming from. I think a lot of times police officers and law enforcement, they get a lot of training in trying to handle victims' families, but I don't think that anybody can understand what someone goes through when someone's family member is brutally murdered until it actually happens to them.
It's true. It is true. It is one of the worst types of pain you could imagine, like the worst experience you could imagine to go through and live through. Even just violence in someone's life is, no one should have to go through it, but to lose somebody to violence, it's a pain like no other.
Okay, so let's start on your journey. Now you've been through all that. When you said you decided, that moment of clarity that you had where you said, I'm going to dive into this work, I'm going to try my best to find out the why. Where did that happen in your career as a student or when you graduated? When did that happen?
I would say the why. I would say it really happened that 2-month period after the homicides. That was the clarity moment where I was like, I have to do this, and I have to keep working on this study and keep going to the prisons and doing interviews. It just fueled me more. It motivated me more. Just like I knew this was kind of my mission to do this. And then I started going back into the prisons, doing this study, giving it out to more offenders, getting more data to be entered in. I just started going just harder at the study. And, as I started going more and more in, that's when I started talking with Laurence Bittaker more. And then he gave up the maps of where Cindy and Andrea were. And that was kind of a turning point there, because I started realizing, I had that solace of burying Nicole. And there's so many families out there who don't have that solace. They have no idea where their loved ones are, and they're still out there. And, especially like on San Quentin's death row, they'll be on the yard talking about how many more victims they have that law enforcement has never got them on, never charged them for, and there's all these families out there looking for their loved ones. And I saw this as like something I had to do as well, to bring these loved ones home. And if I could get it from Laurence Bittaker, I was going to try to do it with all the other ones.
Let's go back to how you ended up becoming one of the main people to go into San Quentin and speak to these.
Well, do you want to go back a little bit further than that? I was going to ask just who was the first person you interviewed inside a prison with this questionnaire?
The first person was actually Laurence Bittaker.
Wow, so you went to the top of the shelf there to find out.
I did. Everybody said that too.
And
I went to the worst of the worst.
So
first,
just for,
yeah.
I know a lot of people know who he is, but just give us a brief description of who this horrendous person is.
So Laurence Bittaker and his crime partner, Roy Norris, they were known as the Toolbox Killers. And in 1979, they bought a van they named Murder Mac, where they kidnapped teenage girls, drove them up to the mountains, where they raped, tortured, and killed them. Sometimes the torture would last 48 hours with tools. The rapes would last up to 48 hours. And one of the method was putting the ice pick into their ear, into their skull.
I read that, and I saw that the district attorney at the time, the screams of one of the victims was so horrendous that the courtroom, they had to evacuate the courtroom because people couldn't handle listening to it.
Yeah, some people actually rushed out and vomited from it.
And you went. So did you mail it to him first?
First, I mailed it, yes.
Tell me about the relationship that you had with him and how it started and how you were able to get in front of him. to get these answers?
Well, he didn't want to do the survey. He didn't want to talk to me. He kept writing me letters back saying, like, I'm not going to participate. I don't want to talk to you. But I was undeterred. I networked in the prison. I went to his serial killer best friend, which was right on the same tier as him. And I said, I really want to get Laurence Bittaker in this study. Can you help me out? And he got me a signed visiting form because every inmate needs to sign off on who comes to visit them. Signed visiting form of Laurence Bittaker. So when I received it, I sent it in and I was approved for him. And of course, I'm living on the East Coast, about 3,000 miles away at this point. So, flying 3,000 miles to San Quentin and showing up at the prison and asking to visit with them, they can still say no right there on the spot. They can refuse to actually come down. So I was worried he was going to do that, but he actually did come down.
You have serious courage to do that. I can't even imagine flying across the country with no idea on what's going to happen to go sit down with one of the world's most notorious serial killers to ask them questions. So I think you might have just been blinded by your need, knowing you now, your need to get to the truth.
Right.
And your need to know answers, and you just don't care. You're just not afraid.
Yeah.
I've never seen, I'm similar where I don't have fear when it comes to these things. And I think that's what's given you the ability to be able to go into these places and get the information that you do is because you don't have any fear.
Yeah.
You don't. You know that you're protected and you know that nothing's going to happen to you. But the danger is real.
The danger is very real. And Laura, describe your physical stature for the audience.
Oh, I'm 5'1". I'm very, very small going into the prisons. And some of these guys are like, over 6'5". I've had some in the cage and triple my size. Yeah, it can be very dangerous. Anytime you're going into a cage with a serial killer, just imagine you're getting padlocked into a cage with them. It's not foolproof by any means. It is a dangerous situation. And I think you're right, Cindy. I've always been just so laser focused to get answers that it really does just take away all my fear. I'm just on a mission to go in there and do that.
Well, let's talk about that first experience with Bittaker. I would imagine, like you said, you had a lot of trepidation and a lot of nervousness and anxiety. I would imagine that he wouldn't even come down. But when he finally did come down, how did you stay focused? Because you how many months did it take for you to get this visit?
Months. It took, because you have to. I was writing back and forth with him and him saying no, and then trying to get the visiting form another way, and then to finally have him come down and be in front of me. And we're both just kind of looking at each other, kind of gawking at each other, not really knowing even how to approach one another. And it was a very awkward moment. And I was worried he was going to turn around to one of the correctional officers and say, bring me back up. But he sat down and, I sat down and I just said, do you mind if I ask you some questions? And we kind of just dove in, and he was way more receptive than I ever could have predicted.
What was it? Do you remember the first question you asked him?
What was the first one? I think, I don't even think I asked him. I think he started saying, should we start at my childhood?
Got it.
Yeah.
And we have you have all that stuff. Do you have notes and stuff of that and some of the recordings?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And we're going to be, just for our audience, we're going to be releasing some of that stuff with Laura, some of the recordings to kind of give you an idea of the conversations she has. She's got a lot of them, and we recorded some of them as well. So it's going to be interesting for everybody to see the methodology that you use in talking to these killers and finding out, and it's pretty revealing. So
yeah.
One of the biggest questions everyone always has is that, of course, he's a serial killer and they lie, right? They lie about everything. We were with Gary Ridgway, Green River Killer. He sent us on a goose chase. The body's over here. Oh, no, wait, the body's over there. Anything to get attention, anything to get in front of the, cameras again, anything to get people interested in him. He promised that he was going to give us the information, and he didn't. And so for us, we were just, from the beginning with you, I was skeptical about where these bodies were and is it true, But now as we've dived deeper into this and we've seen the actual evidence that you have gotten from these killers, it's amazing what you've been able to do. So let's go back to Bittaker. When you started talking about his childhood, what did he tell you?
He said it was filled with neglect. He was given up by his biological parents and adopted within his family by his adoptive parents. They moved around a lot. They treated him like a tenant, like he was just there for room and board. And I double-checked that with it was a social worker's report from when he was 16, and she also noted the same thing. She had witnessed extreme neglect. So that's what I do, is I always double-check everything that they're saying. If they want to give me a piece of information, I ask for the police discovery, I ask for reports, I'll do my own dive into it. I'm always constantly checking everything they say.
And talk a little bit about that, because you have access to information that a lot of people don't have. And it's because, so explain to the audience on how you get that information, and how most of it you get is from the killers themselves.
Right. So the police discovery, before, you go to trial, the police do an investigation and they put it all together in a police discovery, which is the sealed police files. Now, these are not open to the public, not even a PI has access to these files. The reason a offender has access to them is because by law, they are allowed to, go over their own case, prepare for their own defense. Now, this is how I'm able to obtain the police discovery, is I'll get a copy from them, but they do not typically give it out. Usually their lawyers don't even like to give them copies of it because they're scared they might mess up their own case, but I'm still able to obtain it through them. Same with the autopsy reports, as well as their psych exams while they're either in county prison or even before. Like I have Bittaker's from when he was 16 years old. These are protected by HIPAA, but I'm still able to obtain copies from them.
Because they gave you the permission.
Correct.
And your relationships with them has built this trust in order for them to give them to you.
Yes.
And why do you think they're giving them to you?
I've shown up for 10 years, FaceTime. A lot of these guys have severe, abandonment issues, trust issues, and I'm persistent. I'm always, there showing up. They see my work ethic, and I've just been able to build that trust and rapport where they actually trust, these documents that could, destroy them with me.
But they're already on death row. What can destroy them even more?
A lot of them have more bodies. That's the big one, why they don't like to give it over.
Because they don't want anyone to find them.
Correct.
Why is that?
There's one guy right now, he has bodies over in the Midwest, and he's very scared that he's going to be tried for those counts. So some of them are out of state. Then there's some like Bittaker who had more bodies mentioned in his discovery, even physical evidence of these other bodies taken in his discovery. So, for them, a lot of the times too, it's their last playing card. It's like their last piece of power that they can hold on to.
They're Easter eggs. They're little Easter eggs they can keep to them.
It's their bargaining chip. This is the only thing they have left to bargain with.
Let's talk about law enforcement a little bit. Why, like you just said, so there's evidence and there's locations. Why, this is the biggest question, why hasn't law enforcement gone and gotten these bodies and victims and brought them back to their families?
Yes, that is the biggest question. I have reached out to LAPD, Sheriff's Department, everybody I can think of, medical examiner's office, everyone. And, it's always just, like hot potato. My call gets passed around from department to department. I'm told there's no funding, they're already in prison, California is not going to pay for this, to go up and do a search and recovery for these bodies, especially now since both Bittaker and Norris have both passed away.
Yeah, because there's no bandwidth for them. They say it's already, we've imprisoned them, we tried them, we convicted them, we imprisoned them, and now they're dead, and it's time to move on.
And then all these families who have all these victims and their families, there's no resolution for them.
No.
And there are some law enforcement, police departments and sheriff's departments who have asked you to help them.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
We've had that too.
Yeah.
We've had them come to us and say, can you help us? Because we don't have the bandwidth and we don't have the manpower to find these victims.
Yeah.
Well, that's the biggest thing, is they just don't have the funding. There could be, law enforcement personnel that really wants to work on it, but there's just no funding to do this kind of work.
Yeah, we encountered that when we started looking into, we did my Uncle's the Green River Killer documentary, when I was talking to Gary Ridgway probably once a month for about 4 months before we started shooting the documentary, and I'd have like 15, 20-minute calls with him over the phone, and then he started sending me lists of victims, and his victim list, and it was very detailed, and it had like a breakdown of who, what their race was, whether or not he liked them or not, whether or not, all this information. But he was only charged, I can't remember, for like a handful of people for those murders, but his list was in the hundreds.
Wow.
And so I found that there's all those people. And the couple that he gave us and his family, because we had the family ask him these questions, he did give information for a couple of them, but I don't think that was the right information, because he bargained for his life in his trial, and his defense attorney said, listen, if he gives up some of the information on the bodies and stuff like that, can he avoid the death penalty? And that's how he avoided the death penalty. But he didn't really give up anything. And
Right.
so now he's just languishing in prison. They'd moved him, I believe, to a federal prison so no one can have contact with him. And I find that always interesting, too, when they do that, is that, why wouldn't you want to learn more from these people? Because, right now, you can get into state prisons, but federal prisons you can't.
Yeah.
So why do you think they're doing that? They just want to sweep it under the rug because they really can't do anything about it?
It's possible. I haven't personally been inside the federal prison systems myself, but yeah, you have access to them in state prisons, and this is how I've been able to obtain, all the records that I've been able to obtain and the information about all the missing victims.
How many killers at San Quentin have you been speaking to?
Oh gosh, at this point, it's over 15 currently.
Oh, yeah, and that's just at San Quentin. That's not
That's
including
just San
all
Quentin,
the
yeah.
other prisons around the country.
And then remind us again, how many people are included in your study, some of the killers?
Oh, I think we're almost up to 30 for the study.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
And right now at San Quentin, especially since they are dismantling death row and they're going, into the mainline prisons of California, it's very interesting because a lot of these guys think that they're going to be killed. And it's kind of creating the same thing that happened with Bittaker. Bittaker had cancer and he was dying when he was giving up a lot of this information. When death is in front of them, it's a huge motivator, especially when they start to think of where they're going to go to next.
Mm-hmm.
So right now it's kind of happening with all of these serial killers right now on San Quentin's death row. That happened the same with Bittaker.
All right, let's talk about Bittaker.
Hold on, before I just want to get back. So the state of California is disbanding death row up in San Quentin, and they're going to be dispersing all of these serial killers that were on death row to various prisons. They're not putting them in one place. They're going to be kind of sprinkling them around.
Sprinkling them around, yeah.
And then they're going to be in general population, so they won't even be like in a security housing unit or isolated from anybody else? Okay.
Correct.
So most likely they could get murdered.
Yeah.
Because as we know, that's usually high-profile people. It happened to Jeffrey Dahmer, happened to Whitey Bulger as soon as they put him in Gen Pop after he was. Mm-hmm. So it's.
Yeah, and they realize that their lives are really at risk.
So let's go back to Bittaker and let's talk about the relationship that you had with him and the information that he gave you. So how long was it before he passed away that you started talking to him? Like, how long was your time with him?
5 years.
And in that 5 years, what kind of information were you getting from him?
It started with the survey, and then it was, he actually just drew the map of where Cindy and Andrea were in the San Gabriel Mountains. And then it was the map of where he buried all the evidence. So when the day that Norris was arrested, Bittaker had called over to his sister who was living in the duplex next door and got tipped off that the cops were there. Bittaker was able to get rid of all the evidence in the van in his motel room. To this day, it has never been recovered. There's a lot more evidence of his other victims in this buried evidence. And so those were the two maps that he drew of the girls and the buried evidence. From there, that's when he gave me the police discovery, all the social worker notes, all the psych evals, autopsy reports, court transcripts, personal writings. Everything, every document you can imagine on the case.
Let's talk about Cindy and Andrea because we keep referring to them and I don't think a lot of people know who they are and what happened to them. Can you tell their story a little bit? Because we are going to be speaking to people later on in the podcast who are related to them and knew them and had run-ins with Bittaker, and lots of things happened before Bittaker was captured. So let's talk a little bit about when he was terrorizing Southern California and what he was doing.
Well, Cindy was a 16-year-old girl, blonde hair, blue eyes. Him and Norris were trying to go after blonde hair, blue-eyed girls. She was living in Wisconsin with her mother. She had lived 4 years over in Mexico City with her mother. Her mother taught languages, did mission trip. And that summer, her mother was going back to Mexico to do a mission trip to teach English. So Cindy was staying with her grandparents in Redondo Beach. Her mother had just left 3 days prior, and her grandmother at 7:30 on June 24th dropped her at St. Andrew's Church in Redondo Beach. Cindy was feeling very homesick for her mother and her boyfriend back in Wisconsin, so she left only about 15 minutes after the church meeting started and started walking back. This was on PCH, a very highly populated, very safe neighborhood where her grandparents were living, and just started walking home back to her grandparents. Still light out, Bittaker and Norris had spotted her walking along PCH, started to trail her. They actually approached her and said, "Do you want to ride?" She said no. They said, "Do you want to smoke some grass?" She said no. So they actually went up ahead of her, and Norris got out of the van and pretended like he was fixing a tire or something below on the van. And when she walked by, he just grabbed her, threw her in, and they took her up to San Gabriel Mountains. From there, they both raped her twice. They used tools to torture her, and then finally she knew she was going to die, and she actually asked them if she could pray, and they laughed at her. And they said, "God's not here, only devils." They used a coat hanger around her neck to strangle her. Bittaker told me that they used a hammer on her head to crack her skull, and they manually strangled her. It was a very, very long death for her. That's when they put her on a shower curtain and actually tossed her off of one of the fire roads that they were using during the commission of this crime, the torture and the rape. And to this day, she has never been recovered.
And for you to be sitting in a room with the person that did this, how did you feel? I mean,
it's very crazy because like you're thinking of the victims. It's so natural to feel like kind of that rage come up inside of you. But like when you're doing this work and this job, you really have to just put it in the back of your mind and think, okay, your only job is to find her and to help her family. And it's a very hard thing to do when you have to compartmentalize like that, when you're sitting in front of this person and you have to hear what they're saying, all these graphic details of exactly what they did, especially when they're, could be smiling or laughing, which I've had happen before too. And you just have to think, you have to be working for these families, to find this information and keep your cool and stay on mission to find them.
And you have spoken to Cindy's family.
Not Cindy's. Her mother passed away, so she doesn't have, that was pretty much her only family was her mother, and her grandparents had passed away. She does have a brother who I'm still trying to locate.
And then tell us about Andrea.
Andrea was from Ohio, ironically the same town where Bittaker lived for a period of time. She had moved out here with her sister when she was 18 for a better life. She wanted to become an airline stewardess, and she was doing some modeling. She had a boyfriend in Torrance. So one day her sister and her niece and nephew, they went to Manhattan Beach, and Andrea said she was going to go try to meet up with the boyfriend in Torrance because he wasn't picking up his phone. So she hitchhiked from Manhattan Beach to Torrance. Initially, she was picked up by one car, and Bittaker and Norris followed the car all the way to actually the line of Redondo Beach in Torrance, and she was let out, and she started hitchhiking again. She was very close to the boyfriend's place, and Bittaker pulled up. Norris went and hid under the bed in the back seat, and when she got in, Bittaker said, we have some Cokes in the cooler in the back. So she got up to go get a drink, and that's when Norris came out from under the bed and started attacking her, and she fought like a bull, and she was on top of him, even punching him and trying to get to the door. She got to the door a couple times, but they had taken the locks off. And as she's fighting, Bittaker sees how bad Norris is struggling, and she's about to escape, and he slams on the brakes, and that's when Andrea went flying, and Norris was able to get on top of her and tie her up. And the same thing, they brought her up to the San Gabriel Mountains, where they raped her, tortured her, and then Bittaker walked her up alone. This is when Norris actually drove the van back into town to a mart while Bittaker walked her up the fire road. He stripped her down naked, and he raped her again, and he took out a camera and said, "I'm going to kill you," and snapped a picture of her face right when he said that. And he asked her to beg for her life, and Andrea didn't, and she fought all the way up until the end. Bittaker put the ice pick into her ear, stomped it into her skull, and then just pushed her a little bit off the clearing he had her on. And then he walked back to the end of the road, and that's where Norris picked him up. So a lot of times people ask me, why wasn't Cindy found or why wasn't Andrea found? I go, Norris was the one who actually took law enforcement up to these roads to show them where the bodies were. I have no idea why he would be showing them where Andrea is when she wasn't even with Norris. She went on the road with Bittaker. Norris had no idea where they even walked to.
And what year was this? This was in the 70s?
Yeah, 1979.
When everybody was hitchhiking, and that was like a normal thing to do. So they were stalking these girls. They would pick them out of a crowd or walking along the street, and they would stalk them and follow them and then torture them. And so then you were able to get information from Bittaker about where these bodies are. So tell us how that came to be.
Well, before that, I have a question. The question I have is, and I'm sure that he's told you this stuff and it's out there, but just for our audiences, why the recording of their voices while they're killing them? Why the photographs? I mean, why were they doing that? And it's I would imagine, I remember some other serial killers have done similar things where they keep totems and things. So what did he tell you about that?
You know, I even have this on audio recording. I said, why take photographs? Why take audio recordings? And he says right back to me on the tape, I would have taken a video camera if I had, access to a video camera back then. For them, they want to relive it. I mean, this is their totem. This is their trophy. You know, they get to relive this experience over and over again with these photographs or jewelry or anything they're taking off of the victim as a memento.
And you have spoken to Andrea's
family. Yes.
Mm. And what did they tell you? I mean, we'll play that at some point, but
yeah.
Just briefly, I mean, you've made contact with them, and
Yes. Well, Andrea has 5 siblings, and her mother was actually still alive when I first, reached out to them. And well, the first thing when Bittaker drew me a map in San Quentin, my first question to him was, where are their families? Are their families still looking for them? And he was like, oh yeah, they were at the trial. And I was like, well, where are they now? What, are they still looking for them? It blew my mind. And so I had finally found one of Andrea's sisters, and I had told her, I know where your sister is. And she said, well, she was murdered. And I go, I understand. I've been talking to Laurence Bittaker, and he's drawn me a map of where she is. And we jumped on the phone, which you guys have heard. And, it was very emotional. I mean, to be going into the prisons for years and years and doing this work, and to obtain this type of, information and be able to actually bring it to, the families and have that moment of like, there's hope. I just remember like her other siblings, them just all saying, we never gave up hope. We've never given up hope. And I don't think anyone who has, a family member or friend who's been, viciously murdered, that hope of bringing them home, it never goes away.
Yeah. And then let's wrap this up. What we're going to do is we're going to play that moment in the podcast, and that's how we're going to end it for this one. But I want everybody to know that this is just the beginning of we have a lot of things to talk about with Laura. Her work is extensive, and we're excited to dive into this. And we're doing a bunch of stuff with Laura, which we will disclose later on. But this is the first step for everybody to understand and hear what this amazing woman's doing on the behalf of the victims' families. So thanks, Laura, and then we'll kind of wrap it up, and you can hear the recording that she has.
Thank you, Laura. What you've done is incredible, putting yourself in danger and building relationships with some of the world's most notorious killers. It's important work.
It definitely is.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we're going to listen to an emotional phone call that Laura had with Andrea Hall's sister, Julie.
This is the first time Laura is speaking to someone from Andrea Hall's family. She wants to let them know that Andrea hasn't been forgotten and that she's going to do everything she can to try and bring her home.
So you're Andrea Hall's sister?
Yes, I'm her oldest sister.
Wow.
How can I help you?
God, this is so crazy. Were you the one living in Colorado when she went missing?
Yes.
Okay. So, I have a background in forensic psychology, bachelor's, and I've been interviewing different serial killers for the last couple of years, but 2 of which are Bittaker and Norris. And last summer I went to go see Bittaker.
Oh yeah, Bittaker, Laurence.
Yeah, and he drew me a map of where Andrea and Cindy are. And
You're kidding.
No, I'm not. It seems like a movie. He gave me their locations, and I contacted Stephen Kay, the prosecutor. And,
right.
He's like, I don't know what we can do at this point. And then I contacted Mark Klass. I don't know if you know Mark Klass. He had a daughter that went missing, Polly Klass. It was a big case back in '93 or something.
I've known of it. I mean, those stories used to just rip my heart out.
Yeah. Well, he has an organization now about recovering missing children, so I contacted him and I said, there's 2 children in those mountains, that have not been recovered. And so they've actually, they've been flying me back out to San Quentin, and we actually placed where they are on a map, and they're going to make a decision the next 2 or 3 months if they're going to go actually do an excavation for them. But we've actually proven...
They owe us that much.
Yeah, they do. They do.
Thank you.
Oh my God, don't, you're making me cry so hard right now.
I'm sorry.
I feel like I know you, and I feel like I know Andrea digging into this case, and it's like...
Oh my God.
It just breaks my
I
heart.
met all those detectives. I met the lawyer. I was out there twice.
It just breaks my heart, like she's still out there.
It was awful.
Yeah, I can't even imagine.
We would love to have her back. I hope you get it done. They owe us that much. My poor mother did a DNA test so they could test the bones.
You know, I'm going to do everything I can to bring her back for you guys.
Oh, God, thank you so much. Don't lose my number, okay?
No, I just, this case is like, I feel like I knew them, and it breaks my heart. It does, I just feel like I knew Andrea, and I, read about you, and I read about your siblings, and I'm like, they must be still looking for her, and it just kills me. It kills me.
Well, you know, a lot of people, it affected them deeply.
Yeah.
And most of those detectives got out of the force after that case.
I know, and I know Paul killed himself after this case, and... Yes, the suicide too, and, but you see, they heard the tapes, and they saw the pictures, and see, I didn't see or hear any of that. Yeah.
And, my one sister identified my sister through pictures. And, so, it's, you know, and then they wanted us to be part of a documentary, and we refused.
Yeah.
You know, why glorify these idiots?
Right.
You know? They're selfish.
Yeah.
And the things those girls went through is unbelievable.
It's just
Even
beyond.
Think of it.
It's beyond. It really is beyond.
They tortured them.
Oh, yeah. I've heard it straight from their mouths.
Long.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
again and again and again.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
It's just, you're the first family member I've been able to contact and speak to, and it's just like...
Well, I'm glad it was me.
So you have 3 other siblings. I was reading the police discovery, and it said
Yes, I have 3 other sisters that are alive, and my mother's pretty elderly, and she's not doing very well. She had a stroke early this year, and she's in a rest home, and you know, she just keeps wanting to go home, and she can't because she can't live alone, and so...
I just want to bring her back for you guys. I want your mother to have that before.
Yeah, that would probably be so wonderful.
I just feel like this was just something that fell into my lap, and I just feel like God wanted me to do this. And
thank you.
it kills me when I think about it. But I'm just so glad he gave this information to me, and I'm so glad I was able to contact you, and your mom's still alive.
I just don't know how you were able to talk to him.
I don't know. It was 5 years, and he was horrible, and I just broke some wall, and I just and he just gave it, and I couldn't believe it, and then it's been a year of hell going back and forth trying to find the exact pinpoint location and elevation, and trying to galvanize people to care and to go back and look, because these areas were not searched properly.
Oh wow, they took 100 men 100 times on foot.
I know. Well, what's so weird about Andrea is Norris was the one who gave the location, but Norris wasn't even there when Andrea was killed, so I don't understand why it's even a project for me to say we didn't know where Andrea was.
Bittaker claimed that Norris murdered them all.
Originally. He claims a different story now.
Does he really? He murdered her?
Yeah.
And my baby sister, when she went to court, he stared at her because they look exactly alike.
Really?
Yes, he couldn't stop staring at her, and it was awful for her, because he felt like he was seeing a double.
Oh my God.
Yeah, they were both towheads and blue eyes, and...
Oh my God.
Yeah. But I look totally different. So do the other two sisters look alike, and I'm totally different. And then the other two sisters, Andrea and Jeanette, they're both really, really blonde, blue-eyed.
That was his type, too.
Wow.
Yeah.
And when they were small, their hair was like almost white. It was so, that color blonde. And, yeah. Well, that would be wonderful. So keep me informed, okay?
Oh, my God, yeah. Like, I'm going back and forth right now trying to get everybody, like, just to... and they said, it's 40 years, and I was like, there's new technology. I think there's...
It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It does not matter. For 13 and a half years, a piece of me died daily.
Yeah.
I am not the same person I was before this murder.
Right. I can't even imagine losing a sibling. Like, I just can't even.
Unbelievable.
And I was reading in the Discovery that you guys were so close, like you had a really close family.
Oh my God, we talked almost every day. Letters, I threw them away. Because I just couldn't. I had a whole huge portfolio filled with letters. Yes, I was the closest to her.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah. I'm gonna do everything I can.
Well, thank you.
Of course, I don't even thank me. It's just not even. It's the right thing to do, and it's your sister.
Yeah, and I can't believe that they're waffling back and forth whether or not they're gonna do it. That's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Please keep me informed.
Oh, I will. I have your number. You have my number. You can call me, text me anytime.
Okay, same here, okay?
All right.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you for talking to me.
Oh, yeah. Of course.
Oh, my God. All right, I will definitely keep you posted on any more information I get about anything.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
I'll talk to you later.
Okay, bye.
Next time on Partners in True Crime.
On this season of Partners in True Crime, The Serial Killer Whisperer, we will be following Laura Brand's incredible journey as she continues her groundbreaking study on serial killers.
Each week, we will release never-before-heard recordings of her conversations with the most notorious killers in hopes to get answers for the victims' families, and maybe that could lead to recovering their lost remains.
Please visit our website where you can subscribe to the podcast, find show notes, and check out extra content from all of our podcasts. All rights reserved. This has been a production of 722 Media Content.